Want to know the truth about building furniture on YouTube? You might think that when I build a project, I'm chasing perfection, looking after every detail like perfect 90-degree joints, flawless sanding progression, 0 hints of glue squeeze out, and applying finish that's smooth as glass. Well, the truth is, I rarely do any of those. Sure, I like to make my work look as good as I can, but at the end of the day, I simply don't have the time to chase perfection while also trying to keep teaching myself new techniques. I've only been doing this whole woodworking and furniture thing for about a year, so I still very much consider myself a beginner. However, when I get the opportunity to create a piece that's going to be the center of someone's home, it's a nice change of pace to step back from the grind of making other people happy, like sponsors, YouTube, and my community that expect me to quickly and frequently upload project videos, and instead shift my focus on making what I consider to be a high-end piece. So far, you've seen me break down my stock into more manageable but still oversized pieces. And all of my walnut lumber has these really rough edges on it, so I won't be able to get clean, straight cuts. Now, if you don't have a joiner, there are tons of different ways you can achieve this, but today I want to show you how you can use your router table to get the job done. I made an entire video going over this process in great detail last week, so I'll leave a link to that video up in the cards above and in the description below for you to check out. The process is really simple as long as you have a router bit that's taller than the thickest stock that you want to join a straight edge on. Oh, and one thing, make sure that you have dust collection hooked up to your table because this process makes a giant mess. With all the boards jointed, let's take a second to jump into SketchUp to see how this table is going to come together. So here's a rendering of the finished table, and spoiler alert, I actually make a super small change to this design later on in the video, but we'll cover that when we get there. And before I get too far into the build, I want to let you know that I do have downloadable plans that cover every step of this build available for you at the link down in the description below or at spencleydesignco.com. Those plans have detailed drawings, step-by-step instructions, helpful tips, and contain everything you need to be successful at building this coffee table for yourself in full color. And yes, I have a SketchUp file available for you too. Anyway, the table is made up of 5 parts: the tabletop, the lower shelf, the legs, the large stretchers, and the short stretchers. Are those the correct words? I don't know. Told you I'm a beginner. Anyway, the first piece that I want to start with is the tabletop, so let's jump back into the shop to see how that comes together. Since these boards now all have a straight edge on them, I grabbed the boards that will make up my tabletop and ran the clean edge against the fence of my table saw to shave off the rough edge on the opposite side of each board. I'll be gluing these boards into an oversized panel, so I'll make a few marks where I'm going to add some dominoes to help align the boards. Now I know what you're thinking, but I don't have a domino at home, and that's fine. You definitely do not need one at all for this project. I'm just using it because it's fast and efficient for me. However, if you don't have one, you could use something like biscuits, dowels, or just use glue, and you don't need any alignment aids in your panel. I just like to have them for extra insurance policy, and it just makes the glue up a little bit easier for me. And like I said, you definitely do not need to use a domino at all with this project. I, unfortunately, don't have a joiner or planer, so I have to buy pre-milled lumber from my lumberyard. And as you might be able to tell, these boards are not perfectly flat. The dominoes just help me get the boards close to being as flat as possible. Now, to make these panel glue-ups less stressful, I like to start by just gluing the dominoes in. And if you're new to the channel, I want to say welcome and thanks for stopping by. If you want to stay up to date with me and all of my future projects, consider hitting the subscribe button down below and the bell icon to get notifications whenever I publish a new video. No pressure though. With all the dominoes glued in place, I'll flip the opposite edges up and cover them with a healthy amount of glue. A handful of clamps and a few hours of patience gives us this nice large panel. So now that we have the panel all glued up, you'll notice that there are a couple spots on it that have some pretty big voids. So what we're going to do is we're going to fill those with a little bit of black epoxy. Now, if you look at a spot like this, the void actually goes all the way through the table, and if I were to pour epoxy in, it would simply spill out the other side. So I'm going to cover the hole with a little bit of sheathing tape. For the epoxy, I'm using some of this Total Boat High Performance 2-in-1. I don't use epoxy often, but I love this stuff because it comes with pre-measured pumps. That means no difficult measuring or math, just one pump of resin and one pump of hardener. Easy. I'm not doing any sort of ridiculous neon color, so I got some of this black India ink to dye the epoxy jet black. A little goes a long way here. After a thorough mixing, I like to use a syringe to fill all the voids and then come back with a heat gun to help all the bubbles rise to the surface. And because it's about 25 degrees in my shop, I had to leave the epoxy inside my apartment to get it to cure correctly. So now that all the epoxy had time to cure overnight, we're actually going to remove some of the excess epoxy and then sand the whole board down. Now, you definitely could just sand the epoxy off, but it's a lot easier if you use a heat gun. This is real time here. You can see that the heat makes the epoxy significantly easier to remove than sanding alone. Speaking of sanding, after all the excess epoxy was scraped off, I marked up the tabletop with some white wax and then sanded the tabletop smooth. This is just an easy way to see if I sanded everything evenly. I'm gonna leave this panel in a rough state right now, but let's jump back into SketchUp to see where we are now. So now the tabletop is knocked out. Well, not completely finished, but I'm gonna come back to cut it to its final size and do the shaping after I get the base together, just to make sure I have the ability to adjust things if I happen to mess up the base. Because I want to get these panels out of the way, let's knock out the bottom shelf next. This bottom panel is basically the exact same thing as the top, so while I speed through this, I want to tell you that I'm also on Instagram at Spencley Design Co. I typically upload about 2 to 3 project videos a month here on YouTube, but if you want to see even more content or just want to know about projects before they make it here to YouTube, Instagram is the place to be. Plus, if you'd like to see a behind the scenes look at what goes into making all these projects, all the things I mess up, and interact with me on a daily basis, consider following me. And speaking of messing things up, this is what happens when you rush things. Even though I'm using the domino, which most people consider to be hitting the easy button, if you don't set it to the right settings, your mortises still won't be centered. No big deal, right? Well, when you hammer in the tenons, they're too close to the surface of the board, and the pressure from the glue actually blows out the wood. Luckily, this is the underside, so no one will ever know, right? With the panel all glued up, I filled the voids with more epoxy and scraped it off as before. Now this whole process is super tedious, so I'll throw some music on and knock this out real quick. Once that panel is all situated, I can rip it down to its final width. I like to first take a really light pass on one side to remove any potential clamp marks, then flip it and take another pass to get that final width. So now that we've got this bottom shelf ripped down to its final width, we also need to cut it down to its final length. Now I'm going to use a track saw, but if you don't have one, very easily use a circular saw and a straight edge. After one side is cut square, I can measure out the final length of the panel at 36 inches and cut the other side. With the bottom shelf cut to its final size, I grab my palm router and a small round over bit to break the edges. Plus, it gives me the perfect chance to put a little slow-mo into the video. And while I knock this out, I want to know what projects that you want to see me make in the future. So tell me down in the comments, and if I pick your suggestion, I might even feature your comment in that project video. So now we've got that bottom shelf situated, so let's turn our attention to the longer stretchers. I'll start by ripping the two long stretchers to about 2 inches wide. These stretchers are going to meet the legs at about a 5-degree angle, so I set my miter gauge to 5 degrees and made the initial cut. Alright, so now we've got that 5-degree angle cut on this side, and we're going to measure the total length of the stretcher and cut the 5-degree angle on the other side too. Don't have a miter gauge? No problem. A miter saw works great too. Now before we change any settings on the miter gauge, let's actually jump back into SketchUp really quick. So we just cut this 5-degree angle on the stretchers, and we want the legs to sit at the exact same angle, so let's knock those out before I adjust anything on the miter gauge. I grabbed some 8/4 stock and ripped it down to 1 3/4 inch square legs. I want these legs to taper towards the bottom, so I marked out the start and the stop point of the taper, and I truly don't know what this angle is, but it really does not matter. All you need to know is that I want to remove this white part from the legs. This might seem like a pretty tricky cut, but if you watch one of my prehistoric videos where I show how to make this tapering sled, you'll know it's easy. Seriously, that video is hilariously bad. Check it out if you don't believe me. Simply grab your leg and line up the cut marks to the edge of the sled. And after tightening down the hold down clamps, you can run it through the saw to get a perfect cut. So now that we've got one of the tapers cut, all we have to do is take the clamps off and rotate this piece about 90 degrees, and we can cut another taper on the other side. Now as a visual, I like to mark the tapers with white wax so that I don't mess up this next step. So if we take a close look at the legs, you can see that they're actually two pairs of unique shapes due to the angle of the legs, just something you need to be aware of. Anyway, since we didn't adjust the angle of the miter gauge, it's still locked in at about 5 degrees, so we know that these will match up perfectly to the stretchers. And you might call it overkill with this white wax, but I call it a satisfying video. I want the stretchers to join the legs right about here, so I used a scrap piece of 1/2 inch thick plywood to prop the stretcher up and made a mark while I join it with a domino. No, you don't need a domino here. You could use a simple doweling jig, but this is a little faster for me. Before I glue anything up, I also need to make these two small stretchers. They were also ripped down to about 2 inches wide and then cut to length. So now that we've got our shorter interior stretchers cut down to length, we're gonna add them in between our longer two stretchers. Now you're probably used to me saying that you can use dowels biscuits, pocket holes, anything to put these together, but I always use dominoes. But this time I'm actually gonna change it up. And when I say change it up, this time I'm actually gonna use a doweling jig. So this doweling jig accomplishes the exact same thing as a domino, the only trade-off being that the setup time is just a lot longer. However, it's a price difference of about $20 versus about $1,000, so it's up to you. But I thought it was important to show that this project can in fact be done without a domino. Simply clamp the jig down to your workpiece, tighten the stop collar, then drill out the holes and watch the chips fly all over the place. To drill the mating holes, I'll insert these dowel centers, line the piece up where I want it, and I'll
give it a little tappy, tap-a-roo,
to create these indents. After adjusting the stop collar again, I can use a brad point bit to slit in the small dent and drill the mating holes. And there you go, that's how you use a dowel joint, so you don't need a domino. But before we glue up all the pieces for the base, let's head over to the router table. I grabbed the same roundover bit that I used on the bottom shelf and put a roundover on all these base pieces. While I do this, I want to take a second to thank all of my Patreon supporters. These are some of the folks that have joined my community and are supporting me in reaching my goal of quitting my full-time job and taking this channel even further. Just this project cost nearly $500 in materials alone, and I simply could not continue to do multiple projects a month without the amazing support from my patrons. So if you're interested in supporting my channel and getting some awesome rewards, consider checking out my Patreon page. But as with everything on my channel, please do not feel pressured. With the roundovers on the base pieces, I could start by gluing the stretchers together. And see, I actually used dowels. This wasn't the old bait and switch. They really work great. Alright, so we've got to the point with the base that we're ready to glue the entire thing up. Now, your natural reaction will just be to slop some glue on there, throw the clamp on, and then you'll run into one problem. So let me show you how to fix that. Because these legs are angled, if you were to try to clamp them together, the clamp would actually just start to slide up the leg. But if you happen to save some of the scraps from when you made the tapers on the legs like this, you can actually use these as clamping blocks and it'll make everything much easier. With the mortise for the stretcher on this side, I can put some double-sided tape on the opposite side and stick down the clamping block. Alright, so now we're at the point where we're going to glue this entire thing up. Now I already went ahead and glued all of the domino tenons in, so now it makes the whole glue up just a little bit easier. And as you can see, the clamping blocks work like a charm. So the glue set up overnight, and I came back this morning and I set the tabletop on top just temporarily to see how it looks. And there's one little problem. So while the table is rock solid in this direction here, once you push it this side, it actually wobbles a little bit. Alright, so it looks like that solved the issue. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna cut down a couple pieces of walnut so to actually match, and then that'll tie the whole base together and make this thing rock solid. This was the issue that I alluded to earlier in the video. Don't worry, those full plans that I have this update in them. You didn't think I was going to give you a wobbly table, did you? These upper stretchers are made the exact same way as the other ones, so let's speed through those. Oh yeah, that's a lot better. So now that the base is all situated, I'm now confident in cutting the tabletop down to its final width at the table saw, and then to its final length using the track saw. And just try to ignore all that epoxy on the bottom. Apparently buying pre-milled lumber at my store means wood coming with massive voids in it. A rectangular top seemed a little boring, so I grabbed a scrap piece of MDF and cut it down to make a template to get a sweeping curve on the end of the table. I'll mark the start and the stop points of the curve, then get something bendy. Then hammer in some nails and trace the outline of the curve. Just like you've seen me do in other videos, I'll rough cut the shape with my jigsaw, then give it a good sanding to even things out. I set the template on my tabletop and traced out the outline. Grabbing the jigsaw once again, I'll cut about 1/8 of an inch proud of the line I made, and then I can stick down the template with some double-sided tape. I grabbed a small templating bit which has a bearing that will ride along the template and started transferring the template shape to the tabletop. This is going to be loud and messy, so cue the music.
It's Britney.
You know this is a good song. And if Britney Spears isn't your thing, maybe some beautiful router noises are more your thing. No? Maybe some slow motion routing is more your speed then. While you enjoy watching the indoor snowstorm, I want to take a second to thank Elgin for sponsoring today's video. If you watched any of my last 12 videos or so, you've likely noticed these Bluetooth headphones that I've been using for quite a while. They have a noise reduction rating of about 25 decibels, which means instead of hearing something like this, you hear this. Not an exact scientific experiment, but you get the point. And just like this template, they're easy to pop off when I need to head inside for some lunch. Plus, they've got a 14-hour battery life, which gives me plenty of charge to keep listening to Celine Dion or whatever 90s pop singer I feel like that day. If you want to learn more about the Elgin Ruckus Discord earbuds, check out the link down in the description below, and big thanks to Elgin for supporting today's video. Oh, and side note, let Eric do a giveaway down in the comment section below. If I get enough interested people, I think I might be able to talk Elgin into sending a few pairs out. With the full shape transferred, you can see how big of a mess this process makes. But before I bother cleaning up, there's something else I need to do. So now that the overall shape of the tabletop is done, we're going to add a nice underbevel with one of these massive 60-degree bits. But I didn't realize that this bit wouldn't fit through the router base plate, so I had to whip up a custom one out of some scrap plywood. Oh yeah, and don't be an idiot here. You have to turn the speed way down on the router when using this large a bit. Now, the first pass with this router bit isn't very exciting. Neither is the second pass, or the third pass, or the fourth, or the fifth, or the sixth, or even the seventh. But the eighth pass, that's where the excitement is. And now you see why I didn't bother to clean up. So the shop was an absolute mess, but if you're anything like me, you find it oddly satisfying to suck up all that dust. The last thing that I need to do is drill out some mortises for these figure 8 fasteners that will attach the tabletop and the bottom shelf to the base. These pivot to allow the wood to expand and contract with the seasons, and I know, my chisel work sucks. Sorry. It's been a little over a year since starting this channel, and honestly, it amazes me that at the time of recording this, I have around 6,000 subscribers who are interested in what I'm attempting to build in my apartment garage. I haven't set out to create any viral videos or cash in on some weird trends like epoxy river tables. Instead, I'm simply working one day at a time to learn more about woodworking and create things I'm interested in making. And even if you don't love this table, that's okay with me, because on the inside, I always know that my heart will go on. See you on the next one.